Shall we begin?
Hello, and welcome back to the More Than Just Keto podcast. I am one of your hosts, Ashley.
Hey, y'all. I am your other host, Molly. And this episode is going to be very different than any other episode, I believe, that we've done. We've had two-parters before, but this particular topic is something we have touched on pretty much in every episode.
Many times, yeah.
But not in depth. And today we're going deep. We are going deep about mental health because, Ashley and I are all about mind, body, spirit. Like it all goes together. We say that over and over again. We talk about the physical health a lot. We mention the mental health. Today, we're going to talk about mental health, period. That's what we're going to talk about. And particularly this part one is going to be an episode where you're going to hear more in depth Ashley's story and my story of our mental health issues, our mental health journey. I don't know what you want to call it, but basically where we were mentally. I'd say the very first question I had to myself when Ashley and I talked about recording this episode. And the question was, when did my anxiety begin? And my very first thought always when I think of that question is it started on a plane in the sky when I was 23, 24 years old. But the truth is, it started before that. It's just that was my very first panic attack. I didn't know what it was. This was 25 years ago. Mental health was not discussed. You think it still has a stigma now? Let me tell you something. It had a major stigma then. We didn't have the internet. I know I am like a dinosaur, right? Yeah. We had the internet, but it was brand new at that time. Actually, we had AOL. But you couldn't just Google it and find out information. You actually had to go to the library and like read about stuff. So here I was on a plane. And to give you the story around that, I'm going to give that to you later because right now I'm just going to tell you I was on a plane flying with now my ex-husband to a different state. I had just had a baby just a couple months before. So probably I had some hormonal things and I had no idea. But there I was on a plane, left my baby with my in-laws, my brand new baby, to fly to another state to do something I did not want to do. Now, did I think about all that when I had the panic attack? No, but subconsciously, obviously, and emotionally, I was feeling all of this, but I didn't know it. I was just in the air. All of a sudden, I had the heat that comes from your chest up above, right into your head. That feeling of do not touch me, do not talk to me. I felt so strange and I had never felt like that before. I didn't know what was happening, but I know now I was having a full-on panic attack. What happened as well is I had major stomach pain and I had to go to the bathroom and I got, sick to my stomach. And then it's given me like this phobia now to fly because I always think, oh gosh, what if I can't go to the bathroom? It sounds crazy, but anxiety will do that to you. So I had that panic attack. We got to our layover and I would not board another plane. Again, here I'm thinking it's because I'm flying. I'm afraid to fly. And I've said for many, many, many years before I got to the bottom of my anxiety, I thought I'm afraid of planes. That's it. I'm afraid of planes. When the reality is I'm not afraid of planes. And I had flown plenty of times before then, and I've flown since then. But I related that panic attack to planes when the reality was it was not the plane. I do think looking back now that I didn't want to go where I was going. I didn't want to do what we were going to be doing. I had eaten crappy that morning before the plane. And the sick to my stomach probably came from the crappy food. And I was probably used to feeling like that in my stomach, but not on a plane. So it's just funny how we can like make something when it's not. But that's exactly what I did. But I didn't know for years what actually was happening. I didn't know for years. I just believed I was afraid to fly. So moving forward, I went to a therapist. The therapist diagnosed me with social anxiety disorder. I then had some sort of cognitive therapy, which helped me. She dug into my childhood. She dug into my family life. And we know that has a part to do with our mental health. Ashley is very good at this kind of stuff, and she knows a lot because she's looked into psychology and stuff. But the reality is when we're children, how our parents are with us. And I'm not talking about, anything specific. I'm just saying how you grow up matters. And I know this, and it makes me remember a lot with my own children, because nobody's perfect and our parents do what they know to do. But when you know better, you do better type thing. And so when I did look back over the years, when I looked back to my childhood, I do see that I didn't feel safe. There were a lot of things that happened in my life that shouldn't have happened. I was very much a people pleaser my entire life. I didn't know I had anxiety. I didn't know that was an anxiety thing. I just had a mother who was kind of, overbearing. And I had, a laid back father, and we were latchkey kids. We were left home alone. Like, this was normal at the time. And so like all of these things mattered, and all of these things helped build the person that I became, and helped me to cope with good or bad, good ways and bad ways, obviously, with certain situations that came upon me. And I do know that growing up, my mother and father loved us very much. And they definitely took care of everything. They took care of everything. So here I was going to do something I didn't want to do. And all I want to do was go call my mama and say, can you help me not to have to do this? That's the kind of mom I had. She, to a fault, would do everything for us. So that's what she did. And that's what I was used to. So that's kind of what you're talking about, huh? Okay. Ashley helps me to see these things. So anyway, moving forward, I'm not going to try to give you every single detail. I'm just giving you kind of like the background here. So let me go back to that time in my life. Went to a therapist, was diagnosed. Within a year and a half to 2 tops, I separated from my husband. I actually had a medical issue. I had to have like a surgery, and that was really tough. And we stayed together during that time. But then once that was over, it was over. Specifically, my ex-husband kicked me out and his new baby. I mean, this is drastic. And if he ever hears this, he's probably going to be mad, but I don't give a care. I heard this once and I thought, wow, don't be afraid to say what the person did to you, because the person should have never done it if they didn't want anyone to know. Does that make sense? Like, I forget how the girl said it, but she said it so much better than I just said it. And I'm like, that's true. I was a 24 to 25-year-old new mother. My child was about a year and a half, if even that. He was about a year and a half. And my now ex-husband was just a very jealous person. He was a very controlling person. He was just very, like, they call it now gaslighting. I didn't know what that was then.
Like narcissist.
Very, very, very. And again, if you
manipulative,
manipulative,
controlling,
always my fault, question everything. Really, I was very reprogrammed in my life to not make decisions because I didn't know what decision was the right decision.
Because you were afraid. You had anxiety of what was right or wrong. And that person was right.
Even
so it just whips it.
Even taking a right or a left at a stop sign. Like, I would go to take a right, but then he would question if I took a right. I'm like, should have taken a left. It was just always questioning myself. And then when I think back to it, and again, this is not to put my mom down, but when I think back to it, my mom was the same way. We had to do what she wanted us to do, period, end of story. It wasn't even discussed, and some would say, well, that's parenting. Well, that's not how I parent. I don't think that's anyway. It didn't work well because it definitely caused that to be my normal. And then I went and married a man like that. So it was kind of like I went from that to that.
It was kind of like a trap, right?
Yeah.
Like you fell into old patterns very easily
because that's what I was used to.
That's what you grew up with. And so you didn't think it was a bad thing. You just thought it was normal.
Right. And
That's what
so
happens. Yeah.
that's what happened. And so that ties in my childhood, I guess, to
Hmm.
my anxiety episode situation. But to fast forward, I did go to therapy. Like I said, got a divorce. I was living in a different state. So when he kicked me out, I came back to my hometown, stayed with my mom, then got an apartment, moved on with life, got a house. Like I did a lot of different things. And then I went and remarried the man again. What? I was
Drama.
obviously not healed. I
Well,
was
yeah.
very much in a bad place. So, in between that time, I went to see a different doctor. Now, let me add here, no medication at this point, no extreme therapy, just a light therapy from that first doctor in
Counseling
Texas,
mostly and
just a
kind
little
of,
counseling. Yeah,
yeah.
I would
Okay.
say counseling.
Yeah.
So when I moved back to my hometown, at the time, my best friend, which was actually my ex-husband's sister, her and I went to a doctor because she was so upset seeing me because I couldn't leave my house. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go to a restaurant. I couldn't go to a movie. I couldn't do anything. I got so scared of everything. It was like, I'm about to cry thinking about it because I haven't really talked about this in so long, but I really was surviving.
Barely
I
at that
wasn't
point.
thriving
Not
whatsoever.
thriving. Yeah.
I was still very much a people pleaser. I allowed so much to happen in my life in that time that should have never happened, but I didn't think twice about it. I didn't have self-respect. I had lost that in my first
When you're
marriage.
hurting so badly,
Yes.
you are just holding on
Oh,
by a
yes.
thread, and you
Yeah.
can't do much else if that
No.
at all.
Right. And this was before this was in the in between married to him the first time and second time. One of the other things that I guess I just really, because of the way he treated me, I allowed other men to treat me the same way. Bosses,
Conditioned.
coworkers,
That's what
just
we, yeah,
very
yeah, conditioned.
sexual. It was
Yeah.
very sexually abusive. Like I had like a lot of that kind of stuff. And it really took a toll of me, but I really didn't have the self-respect. But we went to a doctor, I don't know what kind of doctor, a head doctor. And he actually said that I had agoraphobia. I'd never heard of agoraphobia. I didn't know what agoraphobia was. So he put me on medication. So I started taking the medication, but my stomach would hurt. And so I'd think, oh, my stomach, it's the medicine. Again, I was still eating. I was still like, I never thought for 2 seconds
The
that the
connection
food,
between,
the
yeah.
soda, the sugar, the drive-throughs, the
And then
caffeine,
medicated on
the
top of it.
cigarettes, like everything I was doing to my body, I didn't think for a second that any of that could have been the culprit for me feeling like crap. It
Right.
must have been the anxiety medication. So I stopped it, but I kept smoking my cigarettes and I kept going through the drive-throughs and I kept eating the sugar and I kept having anxiety and I had panic attacks
That's a vicious cycle.
daily. It was
Yeah.
terrible. I
Yeah.
had to whiten. I'll never forget this. I would drive to work because I had to work. I was a single mom now.
Yeah.
I had a mortgage. Like I had to. So I had to do it. And I remember being in my car, going down to driving to work and just so stiff and holding on. And I would look over at the people next to me and I would wish I was normal like them. Didn't know them, but they're just driving in their car. And there was a time I was free in my car. It was one of my favorite things to do was get in the car, roll down the windows, turn on the music loud and take a ride on the interstate. Like that was one of my favorite things to do when I was a teenager. But here I was white knuckling my way to work to try to even get there. And most days I had to turn back around and go home. And then I had to try again and try again. Thank God I had bosses that were, kind to me. Of course,
Understanding.
they were
Yeah.
also very like, but anyway, but they were very, anyway, again, all men. I worked with all men and it was a time in my life I didn't respect myself. So fast forward, I remarried my ex-husband. And I did that because honestly and truly, I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought it was going to help me to get better. I thought maybe the reason something's so wrong with me is because I have ruined my marriage. I don't have a father for my child. I mean, all these crazy things. Oh,
Just like a
so
lot of
much
guilt. Yeah.
guilt. It was so much. And then I was foreclosing on my house. I had bankruptcy. I mean, there were so many things that happened. And so I think a lot of that definitely contributed to my life. And I was very much at the bottom of the pit. I mean, I really was.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
was.
At
So
the end of your rope.
the
Yeah.
end. So I remarried him, moved back out of state. We had another baby. I tried to live a normal life. It was semi-normal because I had safety again. Like I wasn't the one being dependent on to take care of the child, just me and pay the bills. So I
You
guess
had
some of
help.
that
Yeah.
stress was lifted off of me. I didn't take medication. I never did take medication. I still had some anxiety. I definitely had anxiety. But I left the house and did things more, over there. So we moved back to my hometown and it became a mess again. Ex-husband didn't work, didn't want to work, borrowed money from my family. I was scrubbing toilets on the weekend to make some money to get my kids shoes so they could go to school. So it was like that same old back to this is a terrible situation. He was still the controlling, it was that same, he didn't change. He didn't change. And that's when I got into a depression. So I don't think the anxiety was so big then as was the depression for me, because what happened, it was in the early 2000s, like 2004, 2005. I would not get out of bed. I only lived for my children. All I did was lay around and I ate and I gained weight. I probably was the biggest I've ever been. And I don't really have many pictures of me from then, but that's when I was probably my heaviest and most unhealthy mind, body, spirit, like all of it. That didn't last, but a few months. And he left anyway. And so it was just me and my two boys at this point now. I changed. Something in me changed because when he left the second time, I didn't give a flip. Like I was happy he was gone. My boys were even happy he was gone. He was not a good person to be around. And so we started a new life. I met my now husband. I started exercising, by the way. I didn't have any food plan of any sort, but I was doing Pilates and I was walking. I was eating a lot of bacon. I do remember I ate a lot of bacon and eggs and cheese. So I wonder if I was keto and didn't know it. I could have been
keto before keto.
Keto before keto. It could have been. I mean, I'm telling you, but I still drank Coke Zero. Oh, that's still, you can do that, huh? Anyway, so let me fast forward, moved to a different town, still had major anxiety. Okay. The anxiety never left. The depression might have
once
tucked the
it's
anxiety
cracked
to
open,
the side.
it's just kind of there.
The thing about the anxiety with the depression, like depression, you just sit still, or I just sat still. With anxiety, you're moving. So like, I think because I just sat still and I wasn't challenged and I didn't have to do anything, anxiety didn't come about. I've never been the type that lays in bed and has anxiety attacks. That's just never, mine's when I have to go somewhere. That's always been my thing.
It's an event that triggers.
Yes. It's never just
or something
home,
about
just
to happen.
sitting around. Right.
Right.
So
the anticipation of whatever's going on around you or what you're going to do, that's what causes it. Right.
Yes. So my husband now was very much for me getting on medication. And the thing about medication is I was scared to take medication. I was nervous because I didn't want to get addicted. I didn't know much about medication. So I thought I'll get addicted or it's going to change me or I'm not going to feel like me or it's going to be, oh, my mom or whoever's going to say, oh, she doesn't have faith. She's on medication. I know that sounds crazy, but if you're in church or you're being around people like that, they will make you kind of feel like medication is not of God. And that's not true. But I believed that. That was like kind of inside of me. So my husband now encouraged it. So I went and saw someone, got on medication. I still had anxiety so bad because I had to travel. I had to travel from the town I lived in at the time to work in the big city. It's not a big city, it's Louisiana, but we have town and we have city. So the capital city I would travel to and all around because I was a realtor. So I think at that point I had high function anxiety. I was burning my candle at both ends. I stayed busy. I was a workaholic. I was on anxiety medication, but it didn't seem to help me Like I must have had so much anxiety. I don't know, but it didn't really help me. I certainly wasn't exercising or living a healthy lifestyle or anything like that. I was still a smoker. I mean, it was a lot different. I didn't have good habits for my health, but I was taking medication, but I still had anxiety. So I was like, huh, what the heck? And when I say I had anxiety, I mean like an issue, not just anxiety, because anxiety is normal. It's an
Yeah, for
emotion.
sure. Everybody
Everybody
has that.
experiences
Yeah.
anxiety, but I'm
Yeah.
talking about like a disorder,
Yeah.
like mastered over me, like controlled my life.
Yeah. Like
So
needed to be medicated to, it
yes,
obviously creating problems in your life where you
definitely
couldn't
creating
live a
problems in my life.
normal, in
Was
the
not
normal
normal. I was exhausted.
quotations on
Yes, I
normal.
was exhausted from the anxiety. And I know you know what
Yeah.
I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
I was exhausted because you just, at that point, you're just
And you never stop.
handling.
Even when you're stopped, you're never stopped.
That's right. And because,
There's no
yes,
rest.
never. I was never. I was definitely a workaholic to the nth power. I
Well,
don't know
it
what
satisfies the anxiety. It gives it something to manifest itself
That's true.
into. And
That's
that's
true.
why we do it,
Yeah. So yeah, so that's pretty much everything I can say about it at this point. I still had the anxiety, like I said, I was on the medication. So I honestly felt like I would never not have anxiety. And then I thought I had discovered something and that, oh, this is the cure. I won't have anxiety. I started exercising and eating better, but I still had anxiety. So it still didn't work for me. So, yeah, I don't want to say too much more because I did finally realize a lot. I realized I will always have anxiety. It's just
Yeah.
part
It's
of
never just
me.
like going away. That's
Right.
just,
But I
yeah.
don't have to have it as a master in my life. It doesn't have to
Or it
keep
doesn't have
me
to have control
imprisoned.
over you. Right.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to keep me in prison. And I can and have and do work through it and still live a thriving life. And I have found balance in my life. And I'm not going to tell you any more about it because that's going to be for part 2. And I'm going to stop there. And then, Ashley, I'm going to give it to you for you to share your background, where you were, your story, and lead yourself up to where you got.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just kind of start just a general overview. Obviously, not every detail about my childhood, but I grew up in a family where I was the oldest of 3. I was very responsible, at a very young age for my brothers and sisters and just in the family in general, right? If you're a firstborn, you know what I'm talking about. My parents and my grandparents owned a roofing company and a business. And when I was young, we really didn't have much. And my mom went to school at night. She helped with my dad's business. And so there was just a lot of trying to survive, when I was young. And then it slowly morphed into my dad taking over the business and becoming like the man, very successful, like the man of the household. He's running this business. He went from roofing himself physically to running this business that was making a lot of money. And my mom became a registered nurse. And I definitely think growing up, having privilege, but really coming from nothing really to kind of, having a business, and my dad slowly was being pulled away from the family more and more and more. And my mom was nursing. So there was a lot of time spent with one parent and not the other. And even with one there studying or the other one still managing a business from the house, that kind of thing. So it was just as the family became more successful, that meant that our attention from our parents was not quite the same as it was when we were younger. And my mom was home for 10 years and took care of us. So my parents loved us very much. I mean, they did all the things, like I said, took us on vacation, privilege, we had privilege, and my dad worked really hard to give that to us. He was addicted to making money and he wanted to be successful, and it was super important to him. So as I grew up, we moved into a house that my dad ended up catching someone like in the middle of building, and my parents took over and we sort of finished building this house, and this was going to be our family house and all this kind of thing. Right after that, I was about 16. We moved in all together into this house, and my relationship with my parents was sort of morphing at this point. I was really testing like who I was, and my parents had given me a good amount of space and leash to find out, who I was and what I was into. But I really was just ready to get out of my home. I wanted to move out at 18. That was my goal. My dad was pretty controlling, as a business owner usually is. I had a hard time not, I wasn't a people pleaser, but I wanted to please him. I wanted to make him happy. I wanted him to, I created him being happy with me as, love. And if I didn't do the things that, he saw as perfect, that I wasn't good enough. And that obviously created a lot of anxiety for me at a young age of not being good enough, or not, being a perfectionist, or just wanting him to give me attention because I could, do the things that I wanted, to be able to do to show him and prove to him that I was worth giving attention to. And that really is probably part of the the beginnings of the issues that I, was having. Is I wanted attention from my father and sometimes from my mother that I didn't always get. My mother was very hands-on, very lovey, touchy feely. My dad was not. My dad was a workaholic. On the weekends, he would drink, and that's when we would maybe he was a teddy bear drunk. He was so sweet, so fun. And I was just like, man, I wish my dad could be like this always. He makes me feel loved when he's like this. So that's a very toxic kind of environment. So fast forward to a couple years later, and I turn 18 and I move out, and I get into an extremely toxic relationship with somebody at like 16, and I move out with this person. And not to give all the details there, but I end up marrying this person. And then the marriage kind of is falling apart. I get a call from my mom, and I will never forget where I was standing. I was in the grocery store, and I was picking out like Febreze or something. And I got a call from my mom. My parents were in Cancun, Mexico. My dad had won another trip. It was like the seventh vacation of the year for them. And my mom called me. I was getting calls from my uncle too. And I'm like, something weird is happening. So my mom finally calls, and I'm like, hey, and she's crying on the phone. And she's like, your dad's not okay. And I'm like, what has happened? And she's like, he's not okay. And I'm like, what happened? And he wrecked a Vespa, which is like a scooter, but they go a little bit faster. He wrecked it, had a spinal cord injury, C2, which is the second vertebrae, was paralyzed from the neck down. And at the time, we didn't know the extent of the damage, but that was the result, after months and months. A couple weeks, he'd broken almost all the bones in his face. He was literally, his face was like 4 times the size of it when they sent me the pictures, black and blue from head to toe. He was swollen. It almost looked like he'd been ran over, not just wrecked. So the accident was pretty traumatic. He fell into a ravine. After he fell off of the Vespa, my mom watched the accident in a Jeep right behind him. He had a helmet on. Everything was fine. Like as far as getting there, he wrecks. He put a huge hole the size of like a coconut in the helmet. He falls into the ravine. His friend goes down. My dad is spitting blood into the air. He's choking. He's dying. His friend takes off his clothes and lifts his head up, not knowing that he has broken his neck. There is blood going everywhere. His friend gets off, his shirt, and they start trying to help him. My dad is essentially choking. If he hadn't gone down there, he wouldn't have lived. He would have died just then. They get him airlifted to Cancun. Cancun gets there and says, absolutely not. We cannot take care of this patient. He gets airlifted to Texas. And this is kind of where the story comes for me of my dad getting there. And so my parents left home and did not come home from their trip. So they went from Cancun. So now it's like week 2, week 3, right? It's like week 2, he's in Texas, and they're just trying to get him stable. He has surgery on the C2. He has a spinal fusion. He has some other surgeries I think they did on his ear bones and things. He had broken almost everything in his face. And so they did some surgery and they got him as stable as they could. But at this point, we knew for sure he could not move his arms and his legs. And they said he was a quadriplegic, which means you are paralyzed from the neck down. And that's the second vertebrae. So that means you can only turn your head. So no other function from that. So my mom, after being gone for weeks, calls me and asks me to go to the house. And this is the point where I leave actually, my husband comes with me at the time. We end up splitting up while this is going on. My sister is at home pregnant. My brother is 15 and not going to school. My mom's like, I need your help. You have to go and help your brother and sister because we're not coming home. We're not coming home. So we're on like week 4. We get on a plane and finally we're going to see my dad. He's stable enough in Texas that we can at least see him. We get to Texas and I remember walking through the ICU doors like it was yesterday. This was 12 years ago. I walk in the door. He's in the first unit, the first room to the left. It's all glass. They have him kind of propped up a little bit, like the bed is leaning forward. And I see him and he's got a huge collar around his neck. His face is huge and his arms are out. He's super swollen, like so swollen from all the fluids. And I slide my back to the glass. I couldn't even walk in the room and I just slide to the floor and I just sit there. And I knew in that moment that he wasn't going to live. I didn't know if it was going to be today or tomorrow, but I knew in my heart, my intuition told me that this was going to be it. And I felt like I knew that before anyone else. And having that information in knowing in my heart that this was not going away and this was not going to get better, even if we prolonged this situation, I knew it. I just knew in my gut, this was going to be eventually it. So I walk in the room and I realize that he can't talk to us and we have to use a board and we're trying to spell and he's whispering because he's on a vent. He can't even breathe on his own. So after a few minutes and realizing what condition my father was in, even though he was mentally there, which is crazy because of the injuries that he had, physically, he was gone. So at that point, I remember I walked to the back of the room and I looked out the window and I started crying. And I think my mom and my grandmother came up to me and put a hand on my shoulder and they're like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, trying not to cry. I'm looking out the window and I'm trying to find something to focus on so that I don't have a complete meltdown. And I must have been holding my breath while I was doing that. And in that moment, I started to talk and I couldn't. And I started crying so hard that there was no breath left in my lungs. And I am sobbing and I'm crying. And then at that point, I'm not breathing. And then a nurse comes in and she flips my head down, hands me a paper bag, sits me down and says, "Breathe, you're having a panic attack." No nonsense in the ICU. Sits me down. She's like, "Put your head between your legs." I'm breathing in a paper bag and I'm like, what is happening to me? What is happening to me? So they're like, you're having a panic attack. And I'm like, a panic attack? No, I'm not. I'm so upset I can't breathe. And they're like, she's like, "Yes, hon, you're having a panic attack." That's exactly what that is. So that is my first come to Jesus moment. Oh, we have a problem. Like we have a problem. We have lots of problems, but now they have exploded into, we now have a physical reaction to our anxiety, which is terrifying. And if you know what that feels like, then you know. So to kind of skip over this, my dad went in and out of hospitals. We almost lost him several times. To I don't even have enough hours probably in this podcast to even explain the pure torture that we lived through as a family. There were several times, and this just sparked my anxiety, and it created a lot of morbid thoughts for me later on as an adult about worrying about losing people. Every time I turned around, I thought everyone was going to die all the time. Everyone's going to die. Everyone's going to die. And this came from the anxiety of my mom would he got transported to Peachtree in Atlanta, which is a Shepherd Center, is a state of the art spinal injury. They are one of the best in the country. And some would argue like some best in the world, like one of, there's several. They give you the hope and the dream that this person can still live a life, even if they are fully injured, right? So my dad eventually is stable enough to be moved to this facility and receive therapy. And that's what they do. It's rehabilitation and therapy. And they not only do they deal with the physical therapy, but also the mental therapy. And they really put this patient through it to try to create a new life for them because their life is over, the one that they had. So going back and forth, we go to visit my dad there. He's looking really good. He's got a good spirit. We're like, okay, well, this is good. This is good. We leave. A week later, my mom calls me and tells me that my dad is in a coma, right? He's had all these tests done. They don't think there's brain activity. They don't know what's happened, blah, 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 blah. He gets moved to another facility that's attached to them and it's like more of a hospital ICU setting than therapy. And my mom calls me and she says, you need to get in the car right now. You need to turn the business phones. I worked at the business, by the way, while this whole situation was going on. I was managing the office and I had hired someone to help me and we had hired a sales rep. And so, yeah, my mom was like, turn the phones over, like do whatever you need to do. You need to get in the car now and you need to drive here to Atlanta because we're probably going to have to pull the plug, basically, is what I was told. I literally got in the car. I drove with my friend. I had our friend get us beer and we drank for 9 hours in the car to the hospital because my mom was like, you need to come and say goodbye. This is it. So I get up there. I already have a buzz. There's a huge family fight that breaks out. Me and my family were not agreeing about what's going on. I'm like, I told you this was it. This was going to happen. I've said this from the beginning. I'm angry and I'm sad and I'm devastated. I walk in. They're playing the death piano music in the hospital room. My dad is in a coma. His eyes are rolling around. He's moving around. Terrible, terrifying, terrifying. I'll never forget. Talk to him, tell him goodbye. We each take our turn. We stay another day or two, and then we drive home. And on the way home, it's a sad drive home. I'm like, that's it. I'm just remembering, and my friends with me, and we're just talking about the memories that we have of my dad, who was very close to her. And I get a call from my mom. And I'm like, hey, I'm thinking she's telling me, hey, your dad has passed, blah, 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 blah. She's like, do you want to talk to your dad? I'm like, what? He's like, hey, that roller coaster of emotions and that it was pure, just, I mean, you literally think you've lost someone and they're like, hey, come to find out his kidneys had shut down because there was a medication that he didn't get. So this kind of thing happens over and over again. He would get pneumonia. We'd be back in the hospital. The fire department knew once we got home, my dad finally, after 6 months from their trip, they were gone for 6 months. My mom did not come home for 6 months. They finally brought my dad home and we had 24-hour nursing care in the house. We had all these people in the house. I was still there with my brother and my sister. And at that point, a new baby well, my brother and sister, and my sister was about to have her baby. And then we just kept doing this. We kept doing it. He'd get a fever. He's got an infection. He'd be back in the hospital. My mom was an ICU nurse. He was sometimes like her patient or in her, on her floor in her unit. She'd come home, have to take care of them because the home health nurses didn't know as much as she did. So it was just constant. My mom was under so much stress. We were under so much stress. There was so much anxiety. We thought he was going to die all the time. And then eventually it got to the point where you were just like, is this person just going to leave? I can't emotionally. And if you've ever been in a caretaking position, you get to a point where you pretty much feel like you're dead too. Like you've died. The life you had is gone for sure. But you as a person, every ounce of sadness and anything, it just leaves you over time. You literally go through that roller coaster to the point where there's nothing left. You're a shell of a person. And he eventually got pneumonia so bad that we did have to make a choice. The doctor said that there was absolutely no way that he would live. So that's when we decided to let him go. And that's where my story gets very dark. I really, 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 really get depressed. So right after he passed away, I there was, and it's hard to even admit it, but there was a sense of relief, a sense of responsibility that was no longer there, a sense of like, we're free from this whole nightmare of a year that this took, this toll. It aged all of us and it tore our family apart, tore my family apart. And everybody was grieving in a different way and we couldn't get along. And I was angry and I felt abandoned and I felt left and I felt like everything was stolen from me. And I was angry. And I also had a small death wish. I stopped caring about myself. I started drinking and I started driving drunk and not caring. I remember I would get into arguments about having my keys because I wouldn't let anybody take them from me because I was going to drive. I wanted my car. I didn't care. I did not care. I didn't care what happened to me. I didn't care what happened to anyone else. That's how depression works, right? You can't think about anything else but the things that you're going through and the trauma. And so I finally, got to a point where time started to pass and I started started realizing that, we still had to move forward. And my family had all split up and we'd all gone our separate ways and we weren't talking. I had a niece that was born that I did not see. I didn't even know about her until I met my sister. I hadn't talked to her in 2 years. And this was like the start of the rehabilitation. My family coming back together was the first symbol that we were starting to heal individually. And then we were going to heal together as a family. And um, that's sort of when I started seeing my husband now, and my life started changing. I started really realizing that, I did want to have a good life and I did want to have, the things that I wanted that my dad wanted for me. I stopped being angry and I started realizing that I still had a life that I need to live. And that if I don't live my life, then I am not making my dad proud and I'm not living up to who I want to be. And so that's where kind of some of that started changing for me. And then I got pregnant, I had my children, and I backslid. I ended up with postpartum depression. I did not know it. And this is in my story where all the weight gain really, really, really starts. This is really where my story actually starts, which is I have my babies back to back, 18 months apart. I end up with postpartum depression with the last one, had no idea I had it, didn't know until much later that I had it. And the weight just kept getting added on. It was just, I really started yo-yo dieting at that point for vacations and trips. And I was really realizing I would get healthy for a little while, and I would start realizing, okay, like I definitely, can see that I maybe have some postpartum, and then I would be back to my old ways. I would be drinking again and I would be self-medicating with food and alcohol. And I would just mess this whole thing up over and over again, just yo-yo in and out, in and out, in and out. So I knew I needed help, but I had no idea how much help I needed. And I did not know that my food was responsible for a lot of this. And I didn't know how to really get started. And that's where I'm going to stop, because the next part is really the part up until now, which is the 2.5 years of work that I've done. And we're going to share so much more, but we're going to leave you hanging. And we still love you. And we hope you come and hang out with us again and hear the rest of our story.
So we'll see y'all for part 2.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. You can find and connect with us over on Instagram at More Than Just Keto. Don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss out on the fun. We'll see you next time.